No one noticed the cave at first. In January of 1891, northern Montana was fighting the cold the same way it always had, with burning wood, aching hands, and quiet fear that the supply would not last. 3 miles west of the small settlement, a limestone cavern sat open in the hillside, its dark mouth facing southeast, half hidden by a stand of Douglas fir. Trappers passed it, hunters passed it. No smoke rose from it. No tracks lingered long enough to draw attention. From the outside, it looked empty, abandoned, useless. Inside, something was happening that would later leave an entire community stunned. While families in town woke to frost crawling across the inside of their cabin walls, one woman was living in steady warmth. While neighbors burned through cords of firewood just to keep water from freezing in their buckets, she fed her fire with only a few logs a day. And while most people believed winter survival meant fighting the cold harder, she had chosen a different path, one that worked with it instead. Her name was Marion Whitt. She was 32 years old, widowed 8 months earlier when her husband drowned crossing the Milk River during spring melt. The river had looked calm that day. It always did right before it killed someone. His body was found 2 miles downstream, pinned against a fallen cottonwood. Marion buried him herself with help from neighbors who brought shovels and said the right words. By summer, the sympathy faded. By fall, winter was coming, and Marion was alone with 2 children and a cabin that could not keep them warm. Her daughter, Eliza, was 9, quiet, observant. Her son, Thomas, was 5, restless even in the cold. The cabin they lived in sat on the edge of town, built quickly years earlier when lumber was cheap and optimism was high. It had square corners, a plank floor, and a stone chimney that leaked smoke whenever the wind came from the north, which was most days. Marion worked as a seamstress, mending clothes and sewing shirts for loggers and trappers passing through. The pay kept flour and salt pork on the table. It did not keep the fire burning all winter. The year before, she had burned 9 cords of wood and still woken to ice forming on the inside of the windows. Her children slept wrapped in wool, their breath fogging the air beneath the blankets. Marion lay awake many nights listening to the fire die down, knowing she could not afford to keep feeding it. Winter was not dramatic in Montana. It was steady, grinding, and patient. It did not rush. It waited for mistakes. By late summer, Marion knew she needed a solution, not a perfect one, just one that worked. She remembered the cave. Years earlier, while foraging for chokecherries along the limestone ridge west of town, she had noticed the opening, narrow, no more than 8 feet across, easy to miss if you were not looking for it. The inside widened quickly into a chamber nearly 20 feet across, with a ceiling that rose high in the center before tapering down toward the back wall. The cave ran 40 feet deep. Most important of all, it was dry. Water seeped near the entrance during heavy rain, but the back stayed clean and moisture-free. Even in summer, the stone was cold to the touch. Marion knew what that meant. Stone held temperature. It changed slowly. It absorbed heat and released it just as slowly. She had read enough, listened enough, and lived long enough to understand that most cabins failed not because they lacked fire, but because they bled heat. Flames roared up chimneys and vanished into the sky. Thin walls surrendered warmth to the wind. People burned more wood instead of asking where the heat was going. The settlement had opinions. Cabins were meant to be above ground, with chimneys that drew cleanly. Living in a cave was something desperate people did before they could afford real walls. It felt like moving backward, like admitting failure. Marion did not care what it looked like. She cared whether her children would wake up warm. In late September, she began hauling materials to the cave. Rough-cut lumber pulled from the sawmill discard pile, clay dug from the riverbank, flat stones scavenged from a collapsed homestead foundation, dried moss, pine, pitch. She worked early in the mornings before sewing and on Sundays after church while her children played nearby. She did not ask permission. She did not tell anyone what she was building. She was not building a house. She was building a shelter inside a house nature had already insulated with 60 feet of limestone. The cave's protection was significant, but Marion knew it was not enough. Cold air sank, Warm air rose. Stone pulled heat away through direct contact. Any warmth they produced would bleed into the walls unless she stopped it. So she built a room inside the cave. 15 feet back from the entrance, where the ceiling was still high, she framed a rectangular structure using salvaged lumber, 14 feet long, 10 feet wide, 8 feet high, small enough to heat efficiently, large enough for 3 people to live without pressing against each other. The walls were double layered. First, vertical planks sealed with clay and moss. Then, 12 inches outward, a second wall. The space between became dead air, packed loosely with dried grass and pine needles. Trapped air slowed heat loss better than solid wood ever could. The floor came next. Marion laid flat stones directly onto the cave floor, creating a dense base. Above that, she built a raised plank floor with a 4-inch gap. Cold air settled below. Warm air stayed where people lived. Nothing complicated, just separation. The ceiling followed the same logic. Boards. A layer of canvas salvaged from an old wagon cover. Then more boards above that. Heat rose, warmed the ceiling, and stayed there instead of escaping into the upper reaches of the cavern. She built the entrance facing away from the cave mouth toward the back wall and added a small vestibule, 5 feet long, and airlock. Cold drafts would lose their force before reaching the living space. At the back wall, where the stone ran deepest into the ridge, she built her heat source, not a fireplace. A masonry stove. She had seen one 2 years earlier in a German homestead cabin. The firebox was small. The heat traveled through stone channels before exiting. The fire burned fast. The warmth stayed. Marion traded 2 months of sewing for salvage fire bricks and built the stove from clay and stone. The chimney followed a natural fissure in the cave ceiling, sealed carefully so smoke escaped, but heat did not rush with it. She lined the limestone wall behind the stove with additional river stones, mortared thick, a radiant wall. It absorbed heat and released it slowly through the night. She did not calculate numbers. She did not write formulas, but she understood the system. 4 sources of retained heat. The stove, the radiant wall, the stone floor, the cave itself, layers within layers. She finished in early November, just as the first hard freeze arrived. On November 9th, Marion moved her children into the shelter, blankets, a table, 2 chairs, a trunk of clothes, cooking pots, her sewing supplies. Everything fit. The space felt smaller than the cabin, but warmer immediately. That night, she burned her first fire. 3 logs. The smoke drew cleanly. Within an hour, the thermometer on the wall read 62 degrees. The children slept without shivering. Word spread slowly. People did not confront her. She was a widow. But the comments moved anyway, living like animals. Stone would weep moisture. The children would get sick. A carpenter named Eugene Straub said it openly at the general store. Underground doesn't circulate air. Mold sets in. She'll flood out or suffocate. Marion did not argue. By December, the cold deepened. She burned 2 or 3 logs a day, sometimes fewer. While others fed roaring fires, she let stone do the work. On January 6, 1891, the cold arrived without warning. The temperature dropped 28 degrees in 6 hours. By dawn, it was 26 below zero, and it stayed there. This was not a cold snap. This was a siege. Wood consumption doubled. Chimneys backdrafted. Smoke filled cabins. People woke choking. Livestock froze where they stood. Families rationed heat room by room. And inside a limestone cavern west of town, Marion Whitt woke to steady warmth. By the 3rd week of January, something happened that would force the town to look at the cave they had ignored, and that was when everything began to change. By the 2nd week of January, fear had settled over the settlement like another layer of snow. The cold did not break. It did not soften during the day. The sun rose pale and weak, offering light without warmth. The wind never fully stopped. It pressed against cabin walls, slipped through cracks, and stole heat faster than fires could replace it. Families began counting logs instead of days. Men who had planned carefully now realized their math had been wrong. Cabins that had stood for years suddenly felt fragile. Chimneys that had drawn cleanly since the day they were built began to fail. Smoke curled back into rooms, burning eyes and lungs. People opened doors to clear the air and lost what little heat they had managed to hold. Children cried at night, not from hunger, but from cold that seeped into bone. The Gunderson family, living in one of the best-built cabins south of town, burned through nearly a cord of wood every 4 days. Mrs. Gunderson wrapped hot stones in cloth and pressed them against her children's backs while they slept. Even then, frost formed along the edges of the floorboards. She told a neighbor they would not make it to March if the cold held. It held. On January 19th, 13 days into the deep freeze, the settlement's lay pastor, Reverend William Kayfax, began making rounds. He checked on the elderly first, then families with young children. Marion Whitt was on his list, a widow. 2 children, living in what people quietly referred to as a hole in the ground. He approached the limestone ridge expecting the worst. What he noticed first was the absence of smoke. Every cabin in town had a chimney pouring out thick white plumes, burning wood as fast as hands could split it. Above the cave, there was only a thin wisp drifting lazily from a fissure in the stone, barely visible against the gray sky. The Reverend stopped and listened. The wind howled across the ridge, but near the cave mouth, it seemed to slide past instead of rushing in. He called out. Marion appeared from the entrance wearing a wool dress. No coat, no shawl. Her children followed behind her, playing with carved wooden animals. Neither child was bundled in layers. Their cheeks were pink, not pale. Reverend, Marion said, come in if you'd like. Close the outer door behind you. The moment he stepped into the vestibule, he felt it. Not just warmth, but stability. No sharp contrast. No draft crawling up his legs. He stepped through the inner door and stopped. The thermometer on the wall read 82 degrees. He stared at it, then at Marion. That can't be right. It's been between 78 and 84 all week, she said. I burned 3 logs this morning. The Reverend walked slowly around the room. The stone floor radiated gentle heat. The walls were warm to the touch, not hot. The stove sat quietly, its surface warm but calm, nothing like the roaring iron stoves glowing red in town. He held his hand near it and felt steady warmed, not punishing heat. How much wood are you using, he asked. 2 logs most days. Sometimes 3, if I'm cooking something that needs time. Kayfax did the math without meaning to. 2 logs a day meant a fraction of what anyone else was burning. He asked the question that mattered most. How long does the heat last after the fire dies? Marion opened the stove door. Inside, faint coals glowed. This fire's been going 6 hours. I'll add 1 log before bed. The room stays above 70 until morning. If I let it go out completely, it drops to 65 and holds there. 65, with no fire. In weather that was breaking people. The Reverend stood very still. How did you know to build it this way?
I didn't invent anything, Marion said.
Masonry stoves are old. Double walls are common in root cellars. Stone holds heat. I just put it together and let the cave help. When Kayfax left, he went straight to Eugene Stroud's cabin. The carpenter was feeding his iron stove, sweat on his brow despite the room barely reaching 50 degrees. You need to see Marion Whitt's shelter, the Reverend said. Stroud snorted. I've heard enough about that cave. She's holding over 80 degrees with 2 logs a day. The carpenter froze mid-motion. That's not possible. I saw the thermometer. 2 days later, a dozen people had visited the cave. Not everyone came. Pride kept some away. Fear kept others where they were. But enough came to see. Each visitor felt the same thing the moment they stepped inside. Calm warmth. No roaring fire, no choking smoke, just heat that stayed. The numbers spread quietly. Cabins were holding 45 to 55 degrees by burning 6 to 8 logs a day. Marion's shelter stayed near 80 on 2 or 3. When fires died, cabins dropped below freezing in hours. Marion's space held warmth through the night. People stopped mocking. They started asking questions. How thick were the walls? How wide was the air gap? What kind of stone worked best? Could a masonry stove be built into an existing cabin? Marion answered everything. A trapper named Simon Voss added a double wall to the north side of his cabin and packed the gap with dried moss. His interior temperature rose 12 degrees without burning more wood. A homesteader named Abigail French rebuilt her fireplace into a simple masonry heater using river stone and clay. Her wood use dropped nearly in half. Eugene Stroud visited the cave on February 2nd. He did not apologize. Pride would not allow that, but he asked careful questions about the stove channels in the vestibule. Marion showed him every detail. 2 weeks later, he built a modified masonry heater for a client. The man said it was the warmest structure he had ever lived in. Outside, the cold continued to punish those who had not adapted. Chimneys cracked under thermal stress. One collapsed during the night, filling a cabin with smoke. A family escaped barefoot into the snow. Another cabin caught fire when desperate attempts to increase heat went wrong. People stopped visiting each other. Opening a door meant losing warmth. Survival became private. Inside the cave, life settled into routine. Marion sewed during the day. She managed the stove morning and evening. The children played on the warm floor without gloves. Wood stacked neatly by the door barely shrank. By late February, the truth could not be ignored. Marion had not just survived the winter, she had beaten it. And as the cold began its slow retreat, the settlement understood something had changed forever. But the full cost of that winter and the quiet legacy Marion had created would not be counted until spring arrived. And when it did, the numbers would speak louder than any argument. Spring came late that year, not with warmth, but with surrender. The cold loosened its grip inch by inch, as if reluctant to leave after proving its strength. Snowbanks shrank slowly. Ice pulled back from the river edges. Cabins that had been sealed shut for months opened their doors again, revealing the cost of survival. The winter of 1891 had taken its toll. Across the surrounding counties, 11 people had died, most from exposure. 2 from cabin fires started by desperate attempts to force more heat from failing stoves. 1 from smoke inhalation when a chimney collapsed during the night. Livestock losses were severe. Families dismantled fences and sheds for fuel. Some abandoned their homesteads entirely, retreating east where shared resources offered a chance to recover. In Marion Witt's settlement, no one had died, but the damage was visible. Wood piles were gone. Savings were burned into ash. People moved carefully, thinner than before, quieter. When accounting was finally done, most families had burned through twice what they planned for. Some had nothing left. Marion had used 4.5 cords. She still had 3 cords stacked outside the cave. That fact traveled faster than any sermon or argument. By April, people came to the cave not out of curiosity, but necessity. They walked the walls slowly, tapped the stone floors with their boots, measured the vestibule with rope, asked the same questions again and again, hoping repetition would turn understanding into certainty. A Norwegian homesteader named Karina Bjornstad visited with her husband. They had survived the winter in a sod house that leaked meltwater and lost heat through the roof. Karina ran her hand along the double wall and shook her head. "This is smarter than anything we built back home," she said quietly. Marion sketched ideas on a piece of slate. How to create thermal mass with stone, how to trap air between walls, how to place a masonry stove so heat stayed instead of escaping. 2 months later, the Bjornstads rebuilt their home. Their first winter after that, they burned 60% less wood and stayed warm through every cold snap. The changes spread unevenly, the way practical knowledge always does. Some adopted everything, others took pieces. A vestibule here, a double wall there. A rancher named Clayton Hodges built a masonry heater in his barn using Marion's design. His horses survived the next winter without loss. The school teacher, Constance Merrill, insisted on double walls when a new schoolhouse was built in 1892. Children removed their coats indoors. Firewood costs dropped by half. Even Eugene Stroud changed. He never spoke publicly about Marion. Pride kept that door closed. But every cabin he built after 1891 included thicker walls, stone floors in key rooms, and masonry heaters instead of open fireplaces. When asked why, he said thermal efficiency. Basic physics. By 1895, more than 30 structures within 50 miles reflected Marion's principles. No one called it a movement. No one wrote it down. But winters became less punishing. Wood lasted longer. Children slept through nights without shivering. Marion lived in the cave for 6 more years. When her children were grown, she built a small house in town. It was modest but warm, warmer than any place she had lived before. The cave remained. Trappers sheltered there during storms. Hunters waited out blizzards. The double walls held. The stone floor stayed dry. In 1903, a geologist studying limestone formations measured the interior temperature on a December afternoon. No fire, no recent use. 51 degrees inside, 19 outside. The rock remembered. Marion died in 1924 at 65 years old. There were no plaques, no speeches. Her name faded from common talk, but the knowledge she demonstrated did not disappear. It stayed embedded in walls, in stoves, in the quiet understanding that warmth was not about bigger fires, but about keeping what you made. The cave still sits on the hillside west of town, its mouth dark, its interior steady. Limestone does not forget. It absorbs, it holds, it releases. Marion Whitt did not invent anything new. She listened. She respected how heat moved. She let stone do what stone does best. During the coldest winter in 45 years, while the world froze, she created 82 degrees of calm, not through force, through understanding.